Greetings, fellow humans. My name is Alistair Lord, and I am the Renaissance Yorkshireman. Now, today I'm interviewing Thomas Greco, who is the author of several books about the nature of money. One of them is The End of Money and the Future of Civilization, and another is Money, Understanding and Creating Alternatives to Legal Tender. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how money malfunctions and is dysfunctional for many people in the global financial system, and what some of the possible solutions to those dysfunctions might be. So if I start off, Thomas, so my understanding is you graduated with a degree in engineering. You worked as an engineer originally, then you got an MBA and went into academia. And that's when you became interested in the nature of money. So can you just talk about your background a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you say, I started out as an engineer, worked 5 years in that field, went to graduate school for an MBA, then went into academia. I had a 14-year career as an academic at Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York, in their College of Business. I was teaching mainly statistics and decision sciences, also finance and some other associated courses.
Right.
So actually, while I was in graduate school, I met my wife, we got married, and later on had 2 sons. And about that same time, I started my academic career.
Right.
And so midway into my academic career, I received tenure and requested a sabbatical leave so that I could work full-time on my PhD, which I did at Syracuse University. And it was during that time that I had what you might call an epiphany that woke me up to what I consider reality, which was quite different from what I had thought it was before. So following the beat of a different drum, a lot of different things happened. I decided to embark upon a program of personal re-education.
Right.
Went through a lot of personal growth modalities and tried to learn more about myself, what motivated my behavior, as well as a wide range of other fields, more esoteric sciences, as well as the science and math that had always been my fortes and my main areas of interest. So in the course of doing that, I got involved with the peace and justice movement, the human potential movement, the bioregional movement, and various other movements that you might call progressive or alternative. And at one point, I discovered the School of Living. You know, I was wanting to get involved in some kind of educational process that wasn't just a paper chase, which I considered to be, you know, the university path that I had been participating in. And so I was involved with the School of Living for about a dozen years, mainly in the 1980s. And the School of Living was actually founded by Ralph Borsodi in 1934. Borsodi was a polymath who wrote many books. And he decided at one point in his life to move his family from New York City to a homestead upstate in Suffern, New York. And at that location started the School of Living, which was intended to, you know, steer people toward what it really means to live a fruitful and dignified life, and to become more self-reliant and self-aware. So that's what attracted me to the School of Living. I eventually became president. I was president for about 6 years, and was also co-editor of the newsletter, which was called The Green Revolution.
Right.
So that's a large part of my personal background. The way I got into my interest in money, that actually came quite late. When I was working with the Peace and Justice Center in Rochester, New York, somebody sent us a book about the money system. And even though I'd had courses in economics and knew a little bit about money, I discovered that I really didn't know anything about money at all.
Yeah,
So
like
this
most of
book
us.
opened my eyes, and yeah, right. So I started going deep into the question of what is money, where does it come from, how does it work, what's wrong with it, and in the course of events, I started writing about that and lecturing about it, and that's been a large part of my life for the last 40 years.
Right.
So, as you pointed out, I've written several books on the subject, 4 books actually, and the 2 that you mentioned were the latest ones published by Chelsea Green Publishing Company. And those are still relevant. Money, Understanding and Creating Alternatives to Legal Tender was published in 2001, and that was an overview of alternative exchange media,
Right.
as well as some background into what's wrong with the existing money system. In 2009, my book, The End of Money and the Future of Civilization, was published, and that is a comprehensive overview of the problems with our money system, some history of it, and the second part of the book gets into alternative exchange media, basically what we can do about transcending this dysfunctional and this destructive global monetary system that we have.
Right. Yeah, one of my big interests. So essentially, you had quite a conventional background to begin with, and after this epiphany, you started personal change as well as looking at the money system. Is that about right?
Yeah, exactly. And I discovered that the political process that we have, which we think is democratic, has actually become a charade. The powers that control the political process and the economy and the monetary system and basically everything else, they pull the strings behind the scenes. And so the political process that we think we have some influence over really is predetermined.
Right.
We have the semblance of primary debates and elections, and that's all a charade. And really, the determination is made ahead of time as to who is going to become the top leaders in the political system. As an example, I can point to the last presidential election here in the United States in 2020. We had a series of debates, so-called,
Right.
involving, to begin with, 20 participants. And who did we end up with as candidates for president and vice president were the people who were basically the least favored by the people in those debates, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And so, we shouldn't get caught up in the theater of political contests, neither here nor in the UK or anywhere else for that matter.
Right. Well, I mean,
So
I would argue in the 2017 and 2019 election in the UK that neither of them were free and fair. And there's research by Loughborough University on the biased media, certainly in the 2017 election. But I mean, I don't think they can be described as free and fair, the last two elections in the UK.
Right. So as I delved into the money question, I discovered that money has been corrupted over a long period of time. We started out with commodity money.
Right.
Many different commodities were used as exchange media, and eventually we settled upon gold and silver as the most convenient commodities to be money. And this goes back to ancient times. The Romans had gold coins, and so did many other empires and regimes. And money became corrupted from a very early point. The sovereigns eventually took charge of money, stamping their image on it.
Right.
And they would periodically call it coinage and reissue the coinage and adulterate it with base metals or reduce the amount of metal in the coins, basically appropriating a large part of the nation's wealth for themselves. But then we graduated to basically symbolic money. With the rise of banking, you had banks, which were at first the goldsmiths. They would take safe custody of your gold and give you a receipt for it, which was basically a banknote.
Right.
That could be redeemed at some point at your choosing for the gold that you had deposited. Well, eventually banks discovered that they could issue more notes than they had gold to redeem, and that people were okay with that up to a point until people became suspicious of the bank's ability to honor their commitment. So this was the fractional reserve system. And basically we had two kinds of money in circulation simultaneously. We had redeemable banknotes that represented gold, and we had banknotes that represented other collateral assets. They were also redeemable for gold, but of course the banks never had enough money to redeem all of the notes for gold.
Right. Yeah.
And if you've ever seen this, what was it? This Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart. He made that point that that a lot of the banknotes were collateralized by assets that were not gold or silver and could not be redeemed at short notice.
Right.
But later on, banks started issuing banknotes on the basis of non-valuable collateral or no collateral at all, particularly when they started to buy up government debt, bonds, notes, and bills. So the big corruption and the big problems and the start of the central banking system came sort of around 1694 when the Bank of England was founded by William Paterson and his cohorts. At that time, King William III was on the throne, and he was fighting a war against France.
Right.
And of course, wars are expensive. He needed money to fight the war.
Yeah, they said.
And there's a limit to how far you can go in taxing your subjects. So Paterson came to the king with a brilliant idea, and he said, well, we will make sure that you get all the money you need to fight your war if you will give us, the Bank of England, the privilege of issuing banknotes into circulation by lending them out and at interest. And so this was the devil's bargain, if you will, between political interests and the financial and economic interests, where each got something out of the bargain. The king got as much money as he wanted to fight wars, and the bankers got the privilege of lending basically illegitimate money into circulation and charging interest on it.
Right.
So this resulted in a situation that we have today, with basically every country having a central bank, which does essentially the same thing, And you have governments, at least the powerful governments, able to fight wars to the extent that they want and get as much money as they want. And in the United States today, you can see this is going astronomical in terms of government debt.
Yeah, true enough.
If you look at the growth debt chart, which I show in basically all of my presentations, you see that government debt has gone astronomical, especially over the last 10 or 12 years. So if it wasn't for this collusive arrangement, governments would not be able to engage in warfare to the extent that they do. And we would not have a situation of scarce money for people, especially people in the lower economic classes, and abundant money or abundant pseudo money for governments and mega corporations. So, I've written a white paper on what I call the usury conjecture, where I point out how there's never enough money in circulation for every debtor to pay what is owed. And therefore, government needs to step in as the borrower of last resort to keep the money supply pumped up and prevent depression or decline and crash of the economy. So that's basically our predicament. And as far as the solutions are concerned, I've pointed out that honest money is really a credit instrument that's issued by a producer of valuable goods and services.
Sorry.
So if you have, for example...
So when you say honest money, I mean, this presumably is not created by the central bank or private banks. It's created in what way and by whom?
Well, it could be created by a bank, but we have to get around the lending of money at interest, which causes this continual shortage of money in circulation. Let me explain that. Banks create money by making loans.
Yeah.
That's been well acknowledged by various credible sources, including the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, and others. So banks create money by making loans. Essentially what they do is you go to the bank and you say, I want to borrow some money to fund my inventory of my business. And the bank will have a look at your track record, your credibility, the viability of your business, and they will say, okay, well, we will give you the loan. They will make 2 entries to their books. Let's say the loan is for $1 million.
Right.
You sign a note acknowledging that you owe the bank $1 million, and the bank will create $1 million and credit it to your account. So with 2 entries on their books, your note is an asset. The money they create and credit to your account is a liability. Now you have new money being created. This money is based on sound collateral, the inventory that you have for your business.
Right.
The problem is the banks charge interest, and the interest will accrue simply with the passage of time. But the money supply does not increase accordingly.
So
the money supply only increases when the banks make additional loans. Right. So debtors increasingly owe more to the banks, but the money supply does not increase automatically. The banks have to make new loans to other new debtors in order to keep the money supply pumped up and prevent the money supply from shrinking
Right.
as old debts are repaid. That's why I say government has to step in as the borrower of last resort.
Okay.
And John Maynard Keynes recognized this when he prescribed that President Roosevelt, during the Great Depression, step in with government borrowing. I don't think Keynes recognized that this was a one-way street, however. Keynes's idea was that when economic times got better, the government would repay what they borrowed during the crisis. Well, that stage never came.
No.
It was impossible for the government to go to any great extent in retiring their old debt. All they could do is add new debt to the old until we have, as I said, this astronomical debt growth. And basically, a debt is supposed to be repaid.
Yeah.
So what the government owes is really not a debt because it's never going to be repaid. It's only going to continue to increase. So I talk about pseudo money being issued, which is basically the government stealing money out of the economy under color of law. So when you look at what honest money is issued into circulation by a trusted producer who is ready, willing, and able to redeem that money by delivering valuable goods and services in the short term.
Okay.
And when we talk about the short term, we're talking about maybe 2, 3, 4 months' time. Money should not be issued on the basis of long-term assets, because then you create an imbalance. Money to finance long-term assets has to be acquired from savers who have temporary surplus.
And this honest money is not bearing debts, I'm assuming.
Right. If interest is charged, it needs to be only to the extent of the cost of providing the service. So if you have a bank, for example, doing this monetization of the asset, the amount of interest that the bank should charge should be only enough to cover the cost of their operation, which they then use to pay their employees and to buy equipment and other expenses. So that money goes back into the economy,
right,
and can then be earned. So you don't have this imbalance between debt and money.
Right. So
this is the way to solve the money problem.
So for example, the example that I've sometimes given in the past is if there's 20 borrowers, they all borrow £1 million or $1 million or €1 million, 5% interest over a year, then $21 million of debt is created, but only $20 million of money is created. So that is what would happen in traditional banking. So in the case of honest banking, $20 million of money would be created, but the debt that is owed to the bank would be equal. It would be $20 million and no more. Is that correct?
Right. It's sort of like a discount. The bank takes a cut up front and they spend all of that into the economy.
Right.
So you have the same amount of money in the economy as you have debt that is owed. So it's in balance.
Right. So
yeah.
So I mean, we're being proposed central bank digital currencies as a solutions to the problems that we're looking at. Now, I can't remember it's exactly about a year ago or a year and a half maybe, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK before he became Prime Minister. And I remember him speaking about we're going to have digital currencies, blah, 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 as if there's no discussion about it, that these things are there is no choice. And obviously, there's a push for this all around the world, coming primarily, I would say, from the World Economic Forum. So, I mean, you've just talked about what you call honest money there. Now, are there any other important alternatives to central bank digital currencies?
Yeah, well, let me go back to the political process and the global elite that run the World Economic Forum and the IMF and the World Bank and all of these other financial organizations and mechanisms. There are only two options that the elite have. They can either revamp the system so that we have an honest money system,
right,
and we get rid of this growth imperative, or we can have a global economic catastrophe. The only way they can keep this system going and keep it serving their interests is to basically eliminate democracy, the last vestiges of democracy, and take complete control.
Right.
And this is what we have seen. We've been progressing toward that in steps with the introduction of credit cards, and we already have digital currencies.
Right.
Most of the money in circulation today is deposits in banks, and we access those deposits digitally. My my pension check is no longer a check; it's an automatic deposit,
right,
to my account, my credit union or bank, and we've been given credit cards and debit cards, so it's all credit. Money is nothing but credit today. Some of it legitimate, most of it not legitimate.
Right.
And every time I use my credit card, the merchant has to pay the bank a fee for that. If I pay in cash, that cash circulates many times through many different merchants. And with cash, the bank doesn't collect any fee.
Right.
Beyond what they charged when they originally issued the money, the interest that they charge on the issuance of the money. So when you consider that if you use cash, you're saving merchants money. In fact, I know several merchants here in my hometown that no longer accept credit cards because the credit card fees to them have become so onerous. They are demanding cash. People, on the other hand, like the convenience of credit cards and debit cards, and many people run up big credit card debt, and that has become huge. And much of that is not going to be payable. People eventually are going to have to declare bankruptcy or acknowledge default. So we're headed for a massive debt crisis. The only thing that has staved that off so far has been the government intervening and the central banks intervening to unprecedented extents.
Right.
Putting new pseudo money into circulation.
And we saw
and
this
basically the bail out the banks.
Right. And we saw this to quite a large degree in the 2008 financial crisis.
And yeah, exactly. Instead of bailing out the debtors, they bailed out the banks, and the government took over the bad debts.
Yeah.
So
Barack Obama
this
for that
is
one.
going to get worse and worse. Yeah, well, whoever was in power at the time would have done the same thing, because they're basically puppets that are told what to do. And as part of the elite, they have really no choice. So what we're facing now with the central bank digital currency is complete control of everything you do, because now the bank will be able to trace and track and approve or disapprove every expenditure you make or every income that you have due. If the bank says, or if the government says, well, you're distributing fake news, be it real or not, if they call it fake, they have the option to freeze your bank account. Or if you decide you want to buy a gun or ammo or do something that's going to make you more self-reliant, they can disapprove that expenditure. Sorry, that's not allowed. Or they can basically tell you, well, you can't buy that organic beef. You have to buy the factory created beef. Or you can't buy beef at all. You have to eat insects now.
Right.
And this is not far-fetched, you know, they're talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Actually,
yeah, sure they are.
making us do this. And once they have the power to control every expenditure and every bit of income, you know, we're powerless.
Yeah.
So we're at a really a critical juncture of deciding whether we're going to go along with being completely dominated by this hidden power structure that controls the money and banking system and the political system and the economy along with it, or whether we're going to exercise what little freedom we still have to enlarge our sphere of freedom and self-determination. And the key to that is in the exchange process.
Right.
You know, there are three ways that value gets exchanged. One way is through a voluntary gift. I give you something without any expectation in return. There is the coerced transfer of value, extortion, theft, robbery, most taxes these days.
Right.
Or there's reciprocal exchange. In reciprocal exchange, we expect to get back as much value as we give.
Right.
And what are the processes by which we engage in reciprocal exchange? Well, one ancient one is barter. I have something you want, you have something I want. We make a swap and everybody's happy. Barter, however, is limited because it depends on the coincidence of wants and needs.
Right.
If you have something I want and I have nothing you want, we can't do the barter. So what do? We have invented money to get around that limitation. So with money, you know, money becomes a placeholder.
Right.
If you have something I want, I can get it from you and give you money if the bank approves. And then you can use that money to get what you want from somebody else. And eventually I have to repay the bank the money that I got from the bank.
Right.
But as I pointed out, you know, this process of bank created money has been corrupted, and it's unsustainable and dysfunctional because of the interest that's charged and the way the money is issued on the basis of improper collateral or no collateral at all.
Right.
So how do we get around this?
How do we get around
We
this?
get around this by, well, we get around it by encouraging trusted producers of valuable goods and services to issue their own currency into circulation. And this has been done many times before. You know, in the 19th century in Europe, we had railway companies issuing their own railway money certificates, which they would then redeem for railway services.
Right.
So basically tickets to travel on the railroad. So actually, there was no speculative element there. Instead of the bank borrowing money from a bank and promising to repay it, they could issue their own railway certificates and repay it by providing railway services, which they are ready, willing, and able to do without the imposition of interest by a bank. So you can imagine a utility company, say an electric power company.
Yeah.
And I've proposed a solar dollar project, which would do just that. You get an electric utility company paying its employees and suppliers in part with solar dollars, and then those solar dollars could recirculate through merchants in the community until somebody pays their electric bill with them.
Right.
So you could have an alternative exchange media circulating throughout the community, and that would supplement the supply of scarce dollars or pounds or euros.
Right. Okay. Well,
and that's one way. So that's private currencies. The other way is to organize credit clearing associations of producers who agree to trade amongst themselves using their own internal credit instrument.
Right. Okay. Well, we're just about running out of time. So if anyone wants to look at those things, what are your details of your social media or your website?
Okay, well, everything that I've been talking about is thoroughly documented on my website, beyondmoney.net. That's Beyond Money, all one word, .net. You'll find all of my previous interviews, presentations, writings available or linked on that website. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and you can find me there. Just do a search. My website, by the way, is searchable. Put in a topic or a keyword, and all of the posts that relate to that topic or word will come up.
Great.